All right. We are back here at Song of the Day, coming to you from the Rock Cave. I'm your host, Mark Pierce, as usual, and it is Friday, and you all know what that means on Friday. It is, say it with me, Octane Friday. That's right. Octane Friday. I told you we were going to check a lot of boxes for today because, well, I'll explain that to you. So we're not just doing Octane Friday, we're doing a few themes. Today's Song of the Day is an album. So it's going to check the box of, it's a soundtrack. We haven't done a soundtrack in a little while, and I know that I was going to start doing episodes on soundtracks. It's something that you may not know, which could be a Wednesday theme. There's a lot of you that into music that are going to know these, but there's plenty of you out there that are going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about, Mark. So checks that box. It checks Octane Friday because of the type of music it is, and it checks Guilty Pleasure box because it is a guilty pleasure of mine since I was a kid, and so it's a good story. So let's start talking about it because it's going to take a few minutes. So today we are talking. I'm excited about today's topic. We are talking about the soundtrack to the movie Heavy Metal. Here you go, right here. Who remembers this? Some of you out there are going to remember this and tell me your stories. And a lot of you are going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So let's cut to it. This was an animated science fiction movie released in 1981. It was Canadian and American people involved in it. It was basically rated R, so it had some mature content in it. And it was released to theaters, so it was an animated movie released in theaters. It was something that really was not something that really had been done before, and it was loosely associated, or not so loosely associated, with the magazine Heavy Metal. One of the guys involved with that magazine was involved with this movie, and it basically takes about, I think there's 10 stories from the magazine, and kind of weaves them all together. It made like $20 million off a $9 million budget. So, I mean, it got mixed reviews and no one really knew what to do with it. But it made money, and then it became a cult classic, and we could go see it at the midnight movies. You could go see Rocky Horror, or you could go see Heavy Metal. I first heard about this when I was probably in 8th or 9th grade. And I remember exactly where I was when I was listening to this cassette for the first time, but I can't remember my friend's name, whose house I was at. But anyway, I can picture his house. And we just became a little obsessed with this soundtrack. And then you could see, a little while later, you could see this movie on like HBO or whatever. So, who's in this movie for voices? There's some interesting voices in this film. You got the guy who ends up being Squidward. He's in this one. John Candy, his voice is very clear in this movie. He plays a desk sergeant and then a character named Den. A guy who ends up being in Freaks and Geeks is in there. Eugene Levy is Captain Stern. All of you out there did you know that? Did you know Eugene Levy, Captain Stern? Harold Ramis, Egon from Ghostbusters, he's in it. John Vernon, who played Dean Warmer in Animal House, he's the prosecutor's voice in this movie. And a guy named Zal Yanofsky is in this movie. He's a navigator in the B12 scene, B17. He played lead guitar and was a singer in The Lovin' Spoonful. How about that? So, where are we going with this? The stories kind of weave in and out. There's the famous scene with the space shuttle opens up and a Corvette comes out. I mean, that was awesome for kids, right? The astronaut takes the Corvette down to the Earth, lands. I mean, that whole opening scene, awesome. Then he goes to show his daughter this like orb green thing that he found, and it immediately melts him, and she looks into it and sees how this orb has influenced the time and space throughout time and space, basically in a negative way. So it goes through dystopian New York City, and tells a story about this kind of nerdy kid who becomes a muscle man when he looks at it. You got like a courtroom space station scene where the guy's being tried for murder. You got the B-17 plane scene where the crew's all killed and what happens there. There's a doctor scene with Mutations, and then there's the one about the woman warrior. I mean, it goes on, you know. So there's all these things in there, and of course, there was really probably the first time anyone saw cartoon characters without clothes on. And there wasn't a lot of that, but there was some of that there, so that made it interesting. So anyway, the music itself, this soundtrack's so good. There's 16 songs on here from artists that you're going to recognize, and some you have no idea, that you've never heard of, and they're still awesome songs. So 2 songs from the movie did not make it on the soundtrack. Through Being Cool from Devo, which I like that song, and E5150 from Black Sabbath. Those are in the movie but didn't make it on the soundtrack. So what is on the soundtrack? The leadoff song is the song Heavy Metal from Sammy Hagar. It's in the original recording, so the one that they sometimes play on the radio from his record is a different version, and it's noticeably different if you grew up listening to this soundtrack. And I don't find it as listenable. For whatever reason, I need to hear the soundtrack version of Heavy Metal, and that's a great song. Next song, Heartbeat by a band called Riggs, or it's a guy called Riggs. Awesome song. Never heard of this guy before or anything else he's done, but I love this song. Basically, I love this whole first side especially. Working in a Coal Mine from Devo, that's a remake. Some people just really don't care for Devo. I grew up loving this song. Veteran of a Psychic Wars is Blue Oyster Cult. Actually, there was one other story is that Blue Oyster Cult actually wrote a song called Vengeance for the film, but the makers didn't include it because it was a synopsis of the scene they were doing, and they didn't want the synopsis to happen before the part in the movie, so they used Veteran of the Psychic Wars, and those are 2 songs that are actually found on one of their albums. The next one is Reach Out by Cheap Trick. There's 2 songs by Cheap Trick on here that do not sound anything like Cheap Trick, and it's heavy metal music, and you're like, that's Cheap Trick? I mean, listen to these songs and you'll be like, I can't believe that's Cheap Trick. Great song. Heavy Metal, Taking a Ride, Don Felder. That's the only single from this record. It went to number 43. Don Felder, that grumpy guy from the Eagles. He is grumpy. If you watch the documentary, you're kind of like, don't I like this cat? But anyway, I do like this song a lot. That's probably one of my favorite songs on the whole record, so he's got that going for him. Turn the record over, I think, maybe, but True Companion, Donald Fagen from Steely Dan. That's an interesting ad. Slow song, always like that one. The next song is Crazy by Nazareth. Remember Nazareth? Hair of the Dog. Anyway, this is still not a weak song here. These are all great. Radar Rider, another great song from Riggs. How about this one? Open Arms from Journey. That's random, right? But that was 1981, right? So that was right on the cusp of them making it big. Next one, Queen Bee. Like this song too. This is Grand Funk Railroad. Not so much a Grand Funk Railroad song when you listen to it, but it's catchy for me. I Must Be Dreamin', Cheap Trick. Absolutely. This is not a Cheap Trick song. If you listen to it, it's like, how can this even be the same people that sing those other songs? I can't even believe it. Mob Rules, Black Sabbath, alternate version. That's on there. Yeah, that's awesome. Then you get into some that the last couple I didn't listen to very much. All of You from Don Felder and Prefabricated from a band called Trust. That's fine. These are all the ones that I listed before then. They're all great. And then last to end it is Blue Lamp by none other than Stevie Nicks. So we're almost at 9 minutes. I'm trying to tell this story. How about that? So this came out. You could get the record. It was released on LP, and it sold 1 million copies when it was re-released on VHS. So it was an LP. You could only get it on LP and cassette, and then you couldn't get it at all for a really long time. I had to have it on tape for so long, and it was basically it was always at the top or near the top of the list of every list of most wanted albums to be put on CD for a really long time. It was the holy grail, believe it or not, of CDs. People wanted this. You couldn't buy the album anymore. You couldn't buy the cassette. You had to find it used. It was just not available. And guess how long it was until you could get it? 1996. It was forever. They released it on VHS and Laserdisc. Right beforehand, they put it out in 54 theaters, and it grossed almost $600,000 from just being in those 54 theaters. And they sold 1 million copies of the VHS. I mean, that's how much people wanted this to be released. Why wasn't it released? All legal reasons. All these bands They weren't tied to they were tied to a soundtrack, but then by later on they weren't to do anything to the home release, and it was all tied up in legal reasons for so long that it took forever for them to finally get all the rights together and put it out again on CD in 1996 or 95. The Blu-ray came out. The Blu-ray came out in 2001 or something like that. 2000, somewhere around there. No, 2011. Sorry, there was no Blu-ray then. All right, so again, this is a great record. We're at 10 minutes. Sorry, that's how long I can do to tell this story. Check out these songs. We're going to play them all underneath here. You're going to just click on them and be like, that's interesting. We'll put some of them from the movie soundtrack on there. But if I have to pick one single song of the day, it would have to be, it's either between Heavy Metal, the opening track from Sammy Hagar, or Heavy Metal, Taking a Ride from Don Felder. But it's Octane Friday, so we're doing Heavy Metal, the original version from Sammy Hagar. That just says Octane Friday all over it. That's your song of the day. Check out the other links below. 11 minutes. Sorry, guys, you had to stick with me. Enjoy your Friday, and another great weekend coming up, and next week some awesome music. Have a great day, and I will catch you on the flip side.